If you would, take your Bibles and turn. We're going to be in Ecclesiastes this morning. We're going to be there for the next 11 or so weeks. And take your Bible. If you don't have a Bible, there should be one in the front row in front of you, page about 553 or so. If you are struggling to find Ecclesiastes, it is in your Old Testament. And just go to Psalms, turn a few pages to the right. You'll hit Proverbs, and then you'll hit Ecclesiastes. I'll meet you there in a minute. But I was thinking this week, the merry-go-round was cool when you were a kid, wasn't it? You remember that? When you were a kid, the merry-go-round at the park or at the school, and you would try to get on that thing. Didn't go anywhere. It just went round and round and round, but it was kind of cool as a kid. And if you really were brave, you would get that thing going as fast as you can. And occasionally you would take your hands off of anything to keep you stable, to just prove to everybody that you were the man. And oftentimes that ended in some sort of injury. What happened when you grew up? I'll tell you what happened. Motion sickness. That's what happened, right? But I remember as a kid, I loved the merry-go-round, right? It was cool. And I remember my kids, when they were young, we used to go to the Phoenix Zoo. And they would beg us, pay the extra fee. And you know the extra fee is like abnormal to ride this carousel. And as adults, you're like, what's happening? Like, you seriously want to ride a horse that goes nowhere except around and around and around? But as kids, they loved it, and they wanted to, going around in circles and going nowhere. And there's just something about that. You don't really have any control of anything. Remember those race cars at the amusement park? And when you were little kids, you used to get in them. You used to be fired up, and then they used to go. They had a wheel, but the wheel did no good. It was driven by a track underneath the car, and it would go all the way around to the front. And there's a huge difference between getting on one of those and on a bumper car for the first time and realizing that you actually have control over the steering. You can actually hit somebody with. There's a sense of freedom about that, right? And the lameness of the merry-go-round, the lameness of that kind of rising up in our awareness, it was fun till a certain age until we figured out what was really going on. And when we figured that out, there was no way we were going to do that anymore. It had lost its zip. And I was thinking about that in comparison to what we're going to be studying this morning. Solomon, I think this is what he's saying this morning in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 through 11. If you're not there, get there. I want to read for you the words in context to get a sense of what we're going to be looking at this morning. So follow along as I read for us Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1. It says this: the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north, and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been, what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been done in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor there will be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. And we read that, and it's kind of a Debbie Downer of a passage, isn't it? I mean, look I got to preach this thing this morning, okay? And you look at that, and I think what he's talking about is this immeasurable, unavoidable, mundane cycle of everything under the sun. And then what we learned last week, we studied the end of the book because we like spoilers, don't we? everything mundane under the sun apart from an infusion of significance that can only be supplied above the sun. There's no purpose. There's no aim. Insignificance. It's like riding that carousel. It's like riding the cosmic carousel. No matter what you do, you're caught up in this endless cycle of this world, running and getting nowhere, wondering, is there meaning? What is there to this cycle? But, and that's a huge word today, but here's where he's going. We as God's people, as God's children, have been rescued from this kind of life by what is true in heaven. And though we may live through the same experiences of the generations moving on, we are not caught up in a cycle of insignificance. We are not caught up into a cycle of vanity, because our life has eternal value in the cycle in which we live actually on this earth under the sun. Because we gain our significance above the sun, it actually bears eternal fruit. And that's what he's going after. That's what he's going to examine. He says, listen, I set my heart in order to find all these things. And really, the reality is they only can be found on the upside down. We're going to look at verses 1 through 3. Really, 1 through 3 is a summary declaration, really, if you will, of the entire book. 4 through 11 is a poem, and it's the initial interaction with the preacher. And he highlights really a couple things. He highlights the cycle of nature, the patterns of created order, and he highlights the cycle of human experience. And so the arching theme today over the text is this: upside down life infuses significance into the cycle of every life. Upside down life infuses significance. We need significance. This is the meaning of the passage. Like the preacher knows everything is vanity, and there's no benefit to your toil apart from what is true above the sun. So I need something from the upside to come down and to infuse meaning and to infuse purpose, and that's really our constant ache. That's the ache. That's the longing. And I see here he unpacks this question, this existential question in verse 3. And really our question is, okay, so what happens when significance is infused? What does it give us? And I see three truths here this morning that he teaches us, the preacher. We'll say it like this, if you like to take notes. If gospel significance is infused, three things, three truths. Number one, I see the cycle of fallen perspective, right? Like, listen, I'm living with meaning and purpose because I've gotten that significance and perspective above the sun, but I can see their perspective. I have clarity. I have clarity of this. This is, when I say fallen perspective, I mean this is the normal perspective of people who don't have significance apart from God. This is the normal perspective. Doesn't matter how much money you make, you'll never have enough. It'll never be enough. You'll always ask yourself, is there more? There's got to be more. This is the normal perspective. Here he says it in verse 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. We handled the authorship last week. We're going to say this is Solomon. Not going to apologize for that. This is Solomon. He was born into affluence. His dad was King David, and he reigned after David. He departed from the ways of God to indulge his own pleasure pursuit. And in fact, he wrote Ecclesiastes, and the fact that he wrote it really indicates that here's a guy who, at the end of his life, as an old man, he recognized the foolishness of his ways, and he returned to the Lord, and he wrote just really an honest autobiography of the empty, shallow, aimless life that he discovered apart from God. So he's like, listen, I'm the authority on the subject. Like, I chased it. I chased meaning. I chased significance. And I didn't find it apart from finding my significance with what is true in heaven. And the whole book is written to unpack that. And most of us read it like we read the text today and we're like, man, this is going to feel like forever. But this is really a hope-filled book. It is infused with hope. And he's unpacking really his life as he searches for pleasure, and he's showing us where to find this significance. So he says, the words of the preacher, the son of David, the king in Jerusalem. Here's how he sets up this great life experience. One word. Look at verse 2. Vanity. Vanity. Now, vanity is mentioned 35 times in this book. I mean, this is all over the place. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanities. You think he's trying to make a point? He says, what does man gain by all the toil, all the work, right? All the labor. That word gain is profit. It's in the plus column. Like, what is left of value? What permanent is left of value, he says. What does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? So here's a guy, he's bored and burnt out at the end of his life. He sums up his great experience with one word, vanity. It's kind of hard to nail down the essential meaning of that word. Culturally, what do we think of when we think of vanity? Culturally, we think of a sink or a selfie, okay? Like if you're into HGTV, it's like double vanity for sure. I got you, right? And really, right, when you look at a vanity, what is a vanity for? Looking in the mirror and looking at yourself, and we think of it as a sink or a selfie, but it isn't all about the selfie culture. This is not what he's talking about. He's not talking about my consuming passion is for myself. He's talking about this idea of vapor. It's fleeting. It's transitory. It's a breath. It's like going out in the wintertime. I know we don't experience this in Phoenix. Going out in the wintertime, some of you guys are from Iowa here today. You go out in the wintertime, you take a deep breath, blow it out, and you see that like fog, and then it's gone. Vanity. Life is short. Life is elusive. It's hard to bottle up. It's hard to catch. It's like chasing the wind, which basically it makes no sense. It's an enigma. At the end of my life, when I filled up my life with so many things and I'm found wanting more or not being fulfilled, it's hard to understand. It's complex. And you get to the end of the life, and that's what the normal person thinks and asks, is there more? There's got to be more. I was listening to an old YouTube clip of Tom Brady, and in 2005, he had won 3 Super Bowls. He had been interviewed by 60 Minutes, and the guy's like, listening, he's talking to Tom Brady. Tom Brady starts in, he's like, let me ask you something. Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and think there's something more for me? Like most people wouldn't think that there's something more, he says. Most people would think that you've achieved all that you've set out to achieve. Most people would think, man, I've reached my goal and my dream. I've reached the pinnacle. And Tom Brady said, me? I think there's got to be more than this. This can't all be what it's cracked up to be. What else is for me? And the interviewer said, well, what else? And Tom Brady looks at him and he says, I wish I knew. This is the normal fallen perspective. I mean, the average person would look at that and go, well, since 2005, Tom Brady has won 3 more Super Bowl rings. He's got 6 of them. Most people would go, yeah, but look at what he's accomplished. But at the end of the day, the normal perspective is all of that position, all of that ladder climbing, all of that wealth. What does it add up to? Is there more? After I've done my effort, after I've started my business, after I've paid all my debts, after I've done the whole thing and it's all over, what do I actually have to show? This is the fallen perspective. And we see it. If we've been infused with a gospel perspective, we see that. We understand what they are going through. The implication is clarity. God has given us clarity. This is the way everybody sees it, and I see them, and I understand what they see, and this is what the preacher is voicing. More confused. Nothing really satisfies. The reality of fleeting life complex. And I know that there's a tendency for us to fall back into that, chasing significance as a believer, as a follower of Jesus Christ, chasing significance in all the wrong places. But as believers, we've been rescued from that. We have been delivered from that. And as redemptive history moves forward on from Ecclesiastes, we see that we sang about it this morning. We see that there's a radically new event. God comes down in the person of Jesus Christ, and he what? He makes all things new. And although people gain nothing from their toil apart from God, through Jesus Christ, there is much to be gained from our toil. I have clarity. The gospel has given me significance. The gospel has given me new life. The gospel has made all things new and given me the clarity to see this is how I used to think, this is how I used to feel, this is how most of the people feel. Life apart from God, there's no real significance. If God is not in your worldview filter, there is not really a significance to hold on to forever. And that should give us a compassion, not just a clarity, right? Because we see people out there who are lost, who are chasing significance apart from God, and we see that life is rendering them empty and shallow, and we have to have compassion. We have to have sympathy for them. Because beyond the world in which we live, there is another world which God lives in, and he came down, and he brought hope, and he brought meaning, and he even invites us to join him one day in his home above the sun, and that should make our significant, or rather insignificant life very significant. We get clarity and compassion. We see the cycle of fallen perspective. Gospel significance is infused, secondly. If gospel significance is infused, I celebrate the cycle of created order. The setting of the sun and the rising of the sun and the circling of the wind and the evaporation cycle of the water and all the patterns of created order, they don't just remind me that I'm past. They don't just remind me that I'm just dying and crumbling and passing away. They actually invite celebration into my life. So he begins in poem form. He begins to paint this rather bleak picture of trying to chase down here what can only be found up there. And he starts with this never-ending cycle of the natural world, in contrast, though, to the generations that come and go. So he's setting it up, right? So he's saying, listen, you come and go. You fade fast. And long after you're gone, guess what? The cycle of created order will still continue. Will still go round and around and around. He says in verse 4, a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north, and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. You can imagine that, right? I mean, that's even the global ice caps are melting and the sea is not overflowing. It's like that doesn't make any sense to us, because if we turned on the faucet in our bathroom and just left, what would happen? It would overflow. Yet all streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, they flow again. And what he is saying is this: while the earth remains and does its pattern and does its cycle, I don't remain. Long after I'm gone, the world's going to be still doing the same thing day in and day out. We can always count on the sun chasing its tail. We can always count on the wind circling around and around, back and forth, from south to north, from north to south. We can always count on the water making its journey from the tributaries and the streams to the rivers, to the oceans, to the sky, back again, to the fields, to the tributaries, to the streams, and vice versa, over and over and over again. Long after I'm gone is what he's saying. He's painting this picture. It'll be doing the same thing. It's like one big cosmic carousel ride. Think about that. For many, the sun rising and the sun setting, as beautiful as it is, and people would say yes. I mean, especially in Arizona here, you see some of the prettiest things. For many people, it's just a reminder to them that, man, I'm getting old. I'm not as young as I used to be. I'm not as healthy as I used to be. I'm not as active as it's just a reminder. And what do we do when we get older? We have midlife crises. We buy that Corvette we've always wanted. We divorce our spouse and marry somebody younger. We get all sorts of implants and plastic surgery and Botox and collagen or whatever you call that stuff in different places in our body. Why? Because we're chasing significance down here that can only be found up there. And the earth and the cycle of created order, just a reminder that I am going to pass away, and this earth is just going to continue to go round and around and around and around. And the implication is this. The positive is that we who have been infused, I love that word, infused with gospel significance, we celebrate the cycle of created order. We celebrate the good and the bad. We don't bemoan it. We don't dread it. We don't hate it. We don't fear it. We celebrate it. We see God in it. We worship the great God who created this process and these cycles, and we stand back in wonder, and we stand back in awe, and we behold the glory of the Lord. I was reading, a couple of years ago, I was reading an article, and you want to look this up, you should look it up today, okay? It's called The Great Work of God, and he gives this description of rain. It's by John Piper. And he talks about it from a series of questions. So he says, okay, so where does rain come from? Well, the answer would obviously be what? The sky. But not exactly, right? Water is carried to the sky by the sea over several hundred miles and then poured out from the sky onto the field. And the next question would be, well, how does water get up to the sky and stay there? Well, that's called evaporation, right? So water's not water for a while. And well, how does it turn back into water? Well, that's called condensation, right? And if 1 inch of rain falls, did you know this? If 1 inch of rain falls on a square mile of farmland during the night, that would be over 1 billion pounds of water on one single square mile. That would be like 1.6 something billion pounds of water, 27,800,000 square cubic feet of water, 206,300,000 gallons of water. And the next question you would ask is like, well, how does all that water fall without like crushing the wheat and crushing the grain and crushing the fields, right? Well, it's called coalescence, right? It's little particles of dust attract a little bit of water, and those little bitty pieces of water bump into each other until you have a raindrop. Until that raindrop is heavy enough to fall, they sprinkle onto this field and go back into the root system and go back into the streams and the rivers and into the ocean and then back up again into the sky. Now, if you think about that, you think about the rain falling and the sun rising and setting and the wind circling, this is not some kind of wasted futility. Most see it as time passing away, but this is not how we see it, because we find our significance up there, which drives meaning down here. We see it as the wonderful work of God, and it's actually part of numbering my days as I live in relationship to my Creator. There's a sense that I see everything differently. And so I celebrate the cycle of created order. I celebrate the cycle of nature in which I exist as one generation for the glory of God. So there's something gained for the Christian. There's something gained by the upside down life that is not gained by the downside up suburban life. And though I live amongst patterns and cycles that will continue long after I'm gone, I have been rescued by what is true in heaven. That's why we're here. That's why we sing what we sing. That's why we're going to remember and celebrate and steward the Lord's table here in just a few minutes together as God's people. I see my fallenness. I see my brokenness. I see what Jesus Christ has done for me. I was at war with God. He should have crushed me or at least left me alone to my own demise, but he didn't. He forgave me and he accepted me. And as a result, man, worship is completely different. It's a celebration. I have significance I could never have apart from God. Upside down life infuses that significance into the cycle of every life. If gospel significance is infused, I see the cycle of fallen perspective. I celebrate the cycle of created order. And finally, we see here, I steward the cycle of personal experience. Now he gets into the part of the poem where if it's bleak until now, it's just even more. Because basically what he says in these next few verses, he's saying, listen, here's the reality. Like the Rolling Stones say, no satisfaction, right? No satisfaction. There's nothing new. And by the way, nobody's going to remember you. This is what he says. Let's see from his own words. He starts out in verse 8. He says, all things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter, that's his speech. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, that's sight. Nor the ear is filled with hearing. I was reading David Gibson in his commentary on Ecclesiastes. I love what he said here. He just made the practical comparison. He said, listen, just as water pours into the sea and back again without ever filling it, so the world pours into human beings via their eyes and via their ears and via their mouth and back out through their mouths. And in doing so, they never really reach a point of complete satisfaction. Now, you see it. We saw it in the illustration of Tom Brady. You can interview 100 millionaires, and most of them will say, I thought I would feel this way when I made this much, and I don't. There's got to be more. Doesn't matter how many ladders you climb. It doesn't matter how many positions you fill. It doesn't matter how much wealth you hoard. At the end of the day, you will be asking yourself, apart from a heavenly relationship which drives a heavenly perspective, which informs meaning, you'll be asking yourself, why do I feel so insignificant? And this is what he's saying. Why aren't I satisfied? He says, there's no satisfaction apart from a heavenly relationship which drives perspective. He also says there's nothing new. He says in verse 9, what has been is what will be. And what has been done is what will be done. We've all heard this phrase. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It is already in the ages, it has already been in the ages before us. Now, when he says that, there's nothing new under the sun, he's basically saying history repeats itself, right? Human nature, we repeat, it repeats, it goes on repeat. He doesn't mean no new things are ever invented, but that there is nothing new that we can discover to actually break the cycle of insignificance. Generations will keep coming and keep going, as will the sun, as will the wind, as will the streams. Frantic activity, but not really going anywhere. Futile repetition, but not really any profit, not really any gain at the end of the day. No satisfaction, nothing new. You encouraged yet? Good, because this will discourage you. Nobody's going to actually be remembered. This is what he's saying. It's like nobody, at the end of the day, nobody's going to be remembered. You're not going to be remembered. He said there's no remembrance of former things. He's talking about men of old. There's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. I mean, listen, the Chiefs won the Super Bowl last week. I guarantee if your name's not Burge, you will not remember next year. Most people would be like, who played in the Super Bowl last year? At this time, we'll be like, who played? Who won? My grandparents, I love my grandparents. I have no idea what their anniversary was. I have no idea about my great-great-grandparents. The most significant people in life, we just forget. We don't even remember them. And the question is that we ask ourselves, right? Without a significance that's driven from a heavenly relationship, we're like, am I just one more life? And what the preacher says, he says, absolutely. In the realm of history, in the scope of history, no offense, but you're just one more life. And any other answer is just sheer romanticism, right? Nobody's going to remember you in 40 years unless you leave like $4 million to your alma mater. You know what I mean? Like, and then they're going to put a plaque up, and that's going to be cool for a couple of years until people don't read the plaque anymore. And in the span of 400 years, nobody's going to remember you. And if you rule the world someday, 4,000 years later, people won't remember your name. Some archaeologists might dig up some evidence that you existed, and you might be the rage for like 10 minutes, and then you're going to be forgotten. And he gets more devastating. I'm just trying to paint the picture he's painting, okay, everybody? Hope is coming your direction so big. It's going to be great. But let me just paint this, because this is a reality. In the scope of the universe, in the scope of history, we're not that significant. And he gets more devastating because not only do we really make a dent in human history, but he actually suggests that when it comes to natural history, your life is pretty insignificant too, because he says in verse 4, remember back up in verse 4, he's like, yeah, generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. Any scientist will tell you that organic life on this planet, even if it lasts a billion years, is no more than a flash in the pan in comparison to the full history of the universe. If life is all that is at the end of the day, in the wise words of Metallica frontman James Hetfield, nothing else matters. If I'm trying to get down here, what can only be found up there? But, see, that's the downside mentality. But the upside down reality is that you actually matter to the God of the universe. You matter to him. Not because you'll go down in history, but because you matter to him, period. Whatever you are in this world and wherever you are in this world, his love for you, that's what gives you intrinsic value and significance. So the question is, and I think is the question he's trying to answer by giving such a negative picture, why create your own world? Why create your own big dealness? Why hyper-focus on what you don't have instead of trusting him and enjoying and stewarding what you do have? Like, I may die physically. That's kind of an understatement, isn't it? I will die physically, but I will never die eternally. I wouldn't stand out in a crowd of 10, much less 5. It's just a reality. Seth Kleeberger. Put me in a crowd of 10, probably can't pick me out. I like what Ray Ortlund says. I may not stand out in a crowd of 10, but he says this, but my non-spectacular life is where God chose to hang out. My non-spectacular life is where God chose to set his love, is where God chose to come and to redeem and create significance. God thought me up. God created me. He located me in time right where I can most flourish now and forever through Jesus Christ. And why wouldn't I want to steward that? Amidst all the human experience and the fact that in the scope of history, Seth Kleeberger won't be remembered. Probably you won't either. But God remembers. My significance doesn't come from down here. It comes from up there, which drives meaning down here. And when I understand that, and when I get my heart around that, I'm going to want to steward that. I'm going to care. I'm not an owner. I don't own anything. I don't own this suit coat. I don't own my body. I don't own my bank account. I'm God's possession. If you're in Christ, you're God's possession. If you understand that heavenly relationship, which drives that heavenly perspective, which informs meaning under the sun, you're going to want to care for that in the midst of this human, personal experience. I want to allow the cycles and significance to teach me to number my days. I mean, you think about the hard times. You think about the difficulties, even in, not just in the good times, but in the difficulties. I mean, where the rubber meets the road. I'm going to count them all as joy. I'm going to allow that difficulty produce discernment in my life and knowledge in my life and understanding. I'm going to allow that tragedy that tends to make most of us crumble. I'm going to let it help me help others and meet with others where they're at. I'm going to number my days, and I'm going to buy up those opportunities for good and grasp it, because actually that's an opportunity for God. That's what drives significance under the sun. And though we may live through some of the same experiences of the generations moving on, we don't have to be caught up in the cycle of insignificance, because our life has eternal value, and the cycle in which we live will actually bear eternal fruit. Upside down life infuses significance in the cycle of every life. So, learning to live. All in favor of learning to live? We don't just learn to learn around here. That's just a waste of time to learn. We want to learn to live. We want to apply it. So I got 3 questions for you real quick. And then we're going to go to the Lord's table. Number 1, where am I chasing significance? It's kind of a dual question, okay? So if it's not Christ, you must have Christ. You will not find the significance you really ache for. You ache for it. And you will not find it in wealth, and you will not find it in identity, and you will not find it in acceptance and in performance. You will not find it in anywhere, in anyone but Jesus Christ. You must have Christ. You're going to find out this book is 100% true if you chase significance anywhere else. But in Christ, you will find that infusion of significance in this life. You're going to find that above the sun. I can live below the sun, under the sun, with meaning and purpose. Now, church family, here's the other part of the question. Where are you prone to chasing significance that is not Christ? You know it should be in Christ. You know it. You love Christ. You're coming to Christ, but you're still prone to be tempted away from Christ and chasing that significance somewhere else, whether it be your work, whether it be your family, it could be good things. It could be obvious bad things. It could be questionable things, but it could be good things. And even those good things won't give you what only Christ can give you. Secondly, how can I increase joy in my stewardship? I was reading a commentator. He wrote on the book of Ecclesiastes. His name is William Barrick. And the subtitle of his commentary is Ecclesiastes, and then the subtitle is The Philippians of the Old Testament. And when I first started studying Ecclesiastes, I picked up his commentary, and I'm like, this guy does not know what he's talking about. What in the world? But the reality of it is that, yeah, he's painting a negative experience, but the whole book of Ecclesiastes is infused with hope and saying, like, this life can be enjoyed. This life can be joy-filled if you have the right relationship, which informs the right perspective. And I just love that. How can I increase joy in my stewardship? What are the strategic ways that I can impact joy? What are some of the upside-down realities that I actually need to refresh in my life? See, in order to have joy in this cycle of personal experience, I'm going to have to increase my gospel centrality. How can I increase my joy in my stewardship? And then finally, who needs sympathy for their perspective? Who needs my sympathy for their perspective? When I never give any credence to the way that life feels for someone who's out of relationship with God, who's lost, who's an unbeliever, when I never give any credence to the way life feels for them, I get no opportunity to speak truth to them. if I just keep acting like they're crazy, we do that pretty good as Christians, don't we? We look at the world and can't believe they're acting that way. What do you mean you can't believe they're acting that way? They don't know Jesus. They don't have eyes to see. What do you expect them to act like, right? Well, all we think is like they're acting crazy for the way they're viewing life. We never get that opportunity to actually provide a counterpoint. You have to accept the reality of what they're seeing. You get it. You don't compromise it. You don't condone it, but you see it, and you're sympathetic to their perspective. And if you're not likely engaging them with the meaningful gospel. I mean, like take that phrase, life is too short, fill in the blank. What do most people say? Life is short, eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow we're going to die. Life is short, how do we say it in 2020? Life is short, let's have as much fun while we can. Some of you are like, I reject that. Don't reject that. Don't reject the second part of that. Don't reject the first part of that. Go, yeah, life is short. Life is short. It's too short to have all the fun while you can. It's too short to just eat, drink, and marry and just give it up for tomorrow we'll die. We actually are going to spend an eternity somewhere. See, so it's not an unsympathetic evangelism that's needed. It's a sympathetic truth teller that can really interpret life and help people understand. Upside down life infuses significance into the cycle of every life.